While we got here week one games and everything going on, and we didn't really have a lot of, training camp's over. We're ready for the season. So these pressers have kind of come down. They're kind of on lockdown and everything like that. So not a lot of coach comments. So I found, I came up with a fun little idea here, Shane, that I think, that I thought, to open the season with, I thought it would be fun to spiel on here, but I've come up with the biggest game, not for each program, not for each team, but for each SEC coach. There's one game I think that is most pivotal on their schedule. So I felt this would be a great way to hit on all 14 teams. And the good thing is, not a single one of these is a week one matchup. So there's no, there's not going to be any hot seat talk or anything like that. But you ready to cover every team? And I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, let's go around the league, baby.
All right. So Alabama, of course, and not to be mistaken, I'm not trying to sit here say like if your coach loses his game, he's on the hot seat. I'm just saying this is the most important game for him on the schedule, in my opinion, for this upcoming season. So for Alabama, let's start there. Nick Saban, I'm going October 9th, Shane, at Texas A&M. Alabama has, for the most part, owned Texas A&M, and Jimbo Fisher, too. Going back to his days at Florida State. So I think it's important for Nick Saban to continue that track record, and because otherwise, I think we both agree that Texas A&M's got a real shot at beating Alabama this year.
Yeah.
And if that happens, the storyline will be out there. Has A&M passed or caught up to Alabama or passed them up, however you want to write it. So I think that's kind of the most critical game for Nick Saban to win this year. What do you think about that?
Like in golf? That clip's going to get played a few times that week. So, this is definitely Jimbo needs that signature win, Mike. I know we're talking about Nick Saban here, but man, there's one game that Jimbo's looking at, and it's this one. He's going to get the best of Texas A&M that week. He wants to dethrone them. Think about that. None of his proteges have been able to do it. And I honestly think that Jimbo has the best amount. I think he has the best chance to do it this year. So Saban ain't going to overlook this game by no means, but it should be a hell of a week for him.
All right, how about let's kick it down to Arkansas next, Shane, Sam Pittman. And again, I could have just said Alabama for every damn team, like if Sam Pittman beats Alabama, that'd be great. But I tried to mix this in also to be realistic. If Arkansas loses to Alabama this year, there's not going to be a damn Razorback fan that's going to be upset at Sam Pittman. You know what I mean? So I'm trying to factor in the biggest game for each coach. And for me, Shane,
Can I guess?
Sure, absolutely.
Texas,
week 2, at home, ESPN. I don't know a single Razorback fan. They're fired up to open the season and play Rice, but they could care less. You know what I mean? It's almost like the countdown to Texas. It's not the countdown to the season down there in Fayetteville. They're already circling that game. So, in that sense, let's certainly hope the locker room's not like that, because you don't want them to be overlooking Rice, even though they'll smash them. But, it's got to be Texas, because that, I think that's the one for Arkansas that it sets up the rest of your season. If you come out there and beat the Longhorns, I think it's just going to catapult you to a huge season there.
Absolutely, man. Well, this is one of those games, too, that your papaw grew up hating. He hated Texas because they had to play them back in the day. So, I think this is a huge game. We've talked about it multiple weeks here. I think it's a big one for Sam just because of the national attention that it's going to get. It's, what they're doing in Arkansas is, they may make a Disney movie out of this thing when it's all said and done. And it starts with just how, how hard they're working for something. They're not the best team in the West right now, but they may have the biggest damn heart. And not to get Butch Jones on you here, but I'm just telling you, that means a lot when these guys are playing their hearts out for each other. And I think it shows on that national stage when they play Texas. And if they could come away with a big victory there, man, talk about the recruits starting to come on in. They're going to like El Sam and what he's doing down there.
Absolutely. All right, Shane, how about Auburn, Brian Harsin? Now, I think there's, a couple options here. I almost went with the week 3 game there, Penn State on the road. But again, I think even the biggest Auburn fans, they're going to, they're not going to be mad at Harsin if he loses that game. They want to win. They think they can, and they should have a hell of a shot. But again, you're going on the road, just his 3rd game ever. I don't think that's necessarily the biggest game for him, although it probably is number 2. Mm-hmm. For me, it's got to be the Iron Bowl. And again, not saying if you lose to Alabama, everybody's going to be out on you, but you're getting them at home, last game of the season, and there's something about that game, Shane, where Gus Malzahn was the only guy that could beat Nick Saban consistently. Before him, Gene Chizik, I know they ran him out pretty quick, but he had his success against Nick Saban, even going back to Tommy Tuberville. I mean, they just live for that game down there, and I'm not saying he's got to win it by any means, but I don't care who the coach is at Auburn. I think the biggest game for him is always going to be the Alabama one.
Yeah, I'm with you, Mike. But is it the biggest game for him? Are you expecting him to beat Nick Saban this year? I think when you're talking about, I don't know, it's just me. Maybe, this is your created list. I don't know what's going on in your mind here, but when I think of Brian Harsin, I think winnable games. Mm-hmm. And that Penn State game, there's a lot of fans that think there's something special going on down there on the plains. Mm-hmm. Believe it or not, Mike, there's a lot of people that are expecting huge things and to compete in games like the Iron Bowl, but you got to beat teams like Penn State. So I would think that if I were to put an emphasis on a game or a program, I'm going week 3 because I want to show the nation that we're not that far behind, that we're right there and we're able to compete in the SEC. So they take you serious when you go to games like the Iron Bowl. Right now, no one's taking Auburn serious, and they could change all that week 3.
Yeah, and I think that's why that game's so big. So, hey, I won't argue with you. I think that's right there with it. All right, now Florida and Georgia, Shane, I think this is easy, so I'm just roping them together. It's each other. Dan Mullen is, they won the SEC East last year. They whipped Georgia in the second half, and you got to continue that momentum by beating them once again in Jacksonville. And I think it's the same thing could be said for Kirby. There's so much expectations. Everybody expects them to win the East, go to Atlanta, hopefully make the college football playoff. But, hell, you didn't even win your division last year. Right. So imagine with all this hype, if Kirby and Georgia fails to beat Florida for 2 years in a row, I don't think there's any other choice for either one of these coaches, Dan Mullen or Kirby Smart. Their biggest matchup is each other.
Yeah, that or Tennessee. No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. You could make the argument, obviously, Clemson, because if this is going to be the year that they're going to win a national championship, they've got to beat a team like Clemson. But I'm with you. When you think about how big that game is, it's a game that it's pivotal. I think it's more important for Kirby to win that thing, because it's hard for us to sit back and say, hey, man, this is the year Georgia can win it all when they haven't won the East in a while. So I think that's a huge game for the Georgia Bulldogs. That's a huge game for the Florida Gators, because I honestly think whoever wins that thing they just bought their ticket to the national championship playoffs, if you ask me. I think it's going to get them to the SEC championship clearly, but I think one of these two teams, it would be tough to keep out of the playoffs if they win.
All right, how about Kentucky, Shane? We've talked this game up for months on end, but I think for the Wildcats, it's going to come early. Week 2, Missouri coming to town. You lost to Missouri last season, Eli Drinkwitz first year. That game, I think, is monumental for Kentucky for so many reasons, and they've got to reassert their dominance there against Missouri. What are your thoughts on that selection from Mark Stoops?
Yeah, I could see that. That's a good one, Mike. It's early in the season. This is a game that you just can't afford to lose. Right. I think if you want to be taken seriously, you got to beat Mizzou. And if a lot of people are circling Florida saying, is this their year? Is this the year we upset the Gators again? Well, you don't get there if you lose to Missouri. So, yeah, I'm with you on this one, Mike.
All right, how about this? This was a tough one for me. There's a number of options. But for LSU coach Ed Orgeron, that Alabama game looms so large, but it's in Bryant-Denny. I think the option for Coach O is the regular season finale. Texas A&M at home. That's a team that LSU, up until here recently, they've owned the Aggies. Now, if Texas A&M wins this year, it's 3 out of 4, I believe they've won. So I think it's huge, and I know we both have said this before, but the SEC West may come down to that showdown. LSU, Texas A&M, the final game of the season. I think that's the biggest one for Coach O. What about you?
Definitely a huge game, Mike, but I think it starts week 1 with UCLA. Yeah, it's
I considered it.
I mean, coming off, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to hype up UCLA in the Hawaii game or anything like that. But, this program started so slow and so sloppy last season. They can't afford to do that again this season. And UCLA is one of those programs that's not going to have trouble putting points up. You're going to have to go toe-to-toe for a little while. Now, I think the competitive depth is going to take advantage. LSU's definitely going to be able to take advantage of that and then run away with this thing. I truly believe that. But you cannot afford to trip right out of the gates, because if you do, no one takes you serious. Nobody cares, about the Kentucky game. Nobody's watching the Florida game anymore because they have no credit. So I think it's very important for Coach O and to get just squash all this hot seat talk, man, because our people out there are already saying it. Come out and just crush your opponent. So give me UCLA.
Okay. Now, here's another one. This was tricky for me, Shane. Ole Miss coach Lane Kiffin, so many options on the board here. Of course, the Egg Bowl, Alabama. That's one Ole Miss fans desperately want to win. But I threw a wild card here, Shane. I want to know what you think. LSU at home, October 23rd. And the reason I'm picking this one is because, for the most part, what I'm seeing is everybody saying, well, the West is, Alabama, A&M, LSU, and everybody else. And I think this is an opportunity for Ole Miss to kind of climb that ladder and show that they belong. Certainly, you could say, the Alabama game after last season, Ole Miss looked so good in that one. But in my mind, I feel like Alabama is going to come more prepared this year for Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin. So I think the biggest one for him is beaten, and that is a rivalry game, Ole Miss LSU. So I think it's LSU for Lane Kiffin. What do you think?
It's also Eli Manning Day, so I think it's going to be a hell of a game. I mean, obviously, a little piece of me wants to pull for the Alabama game just because it was kind of entertaining last year, and it makes you wonder, is it going to be more entertaining this season? So that would be the only one I would probably put up there, just because it's always fun seeing Lane and Nick Saban go at it. These guys, they've got a dynamic relationship, to say the least. Right. But you can't argue with Tennessee either,
No, that's a good one. There's a lot of options for Lane Kiffin.
Yeah, he's got a long list. So I mean, you can make an argument just about every game they have this year. But I'm good with either one of them, Mike. I think they're all important, and I think in their fun way, Lane's going to make them competitive.
Now, Mississippi State, I think this one is actually kind of easy. Mike Leach, biggest game for him, I think it's the Egg Bowl. After losing last year, you're getting Ole Miss at home, regular season finale. When you got the job, Mississippi State had won 2 in a row in the series, and now if you flip that to losing 2 in a row, I won't say the fans will turn on them, but hell, that's that's a rivalry that has got many coaches fired. You know what?
Yeah, man. That's one. Some folks don't even go to any of the games but that one. I mean, that's just the rivalry. It's deep in that state, and it's something that they can hang over each other. And it's, I don't feel like the coaches really understood that last season, but I think after the game played out, they realized it real quick. So I think it's going to get more competitive each time these teams face each other. And it's just the outcome. I mean, you hold it over each other's head for a whole season. So, yeah, I'm good with that. I mean, there's a lot of good games on that list. But I don't know. I ain't going to lie, Mike. I think if you could repeat beating LSU, it'd be a pretty big deal. So if you could, start out the season 4-0, then maybe people will take Mississippi State serious.
Now, how about Missouri Shane coach Eli Drinkwitz? This one was kind of tough for me because there's several different options. Week 2, Kentucky certainly, but I think that fan base is already looking past Kentucky. Hell, they beat them last year. This year, like I said, a lot of different options. But how about this one? Florida at home late in the season, November 12th. That was the game. Of course, there was a little mini brawl at halftime. That was the game. Dan Mullen came out in the damn Darth Vader outfit. I think if you're Missouri and Eli Drinkwitz, this is your opportunity to say, hey, we belong as an SEC East contender moving forward, and you have to do that. I mean, you could rack up all the wins against Vanderbilt and South Carolina and all these programs you want, but you're not realistically competing unless you can challenge Georgia, Florida, teams like that in the East. So I think getting the Gators late in the year when it's going to be cold and giving all the bad blood, I think this is Drinkowitz's opportunity to show that he can pull another upset here.
Yeah, I'm with you, Mike. I could see that. I could see that argument. But I will tell you, I'm looking at this schedule. I'm looking at this schedule. And a lot of these Mizzou fans, like you say, they're overlooking teams like Kentucky. They're overlooking teams like Tennessee. And when I look at Mizzou, there's a real shot of them going undefeated into that Texas A&M game. So I'm going to circle the Tennessee or the Kentucky game, either one of those. Just make sure they don't overlook one of those programs. And Big Blue Nation, you may want to turn this off. I didn't mean it. I still think that's going to be a hell of a game between you two. But, Mizzou cannot afford to overlook any one of the programs on this list, because if they play their cards right, they could be undefeated going into Texas A&M. Then all of a sudden we're saying, is this the year? Is this the year that Mizzou gets back on top in the East? So I know that's a lot of wishful thinking, but I'm telling you, talk to that fan base right now. They are not scared of any program on that schedule until they meet Texas A&M.
Now, South Carolina, Shane Beamer, some interesting options. Early in the season, we're expecting 2 wins. I don't want to call them must wins, but, he's got to come out strong. But I went away from that one, Shane. I think the biggest one for Shane Beamer comes in the middle of the season here. October 16th, Vanderbilt at home. You've got to ensure that that you're going to get some SEC wins, and you're not the worst program in the SEC East. I think that's the biggest game for Shane Beamer this year. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, that or Tennessee, one of those. I think you hit the nail on the head. Beamer doesn't have high expectations, but he doesn't have low expectations either. I mean, when you're finishing below Vanderbilt or below Tennessee, that makes the fan base irate. So can't have that. So, yeah, I think that the back-to-back, I think they play back-to-back, don't they? Tennessee and Vanderbilt.
Yes, sir.
If they could run that state, then Shane's crew would be all right with that.
All right, how about Tennessee? This one I thought was kind of easy for me. I know there's a lot of games fans like you want to win here, Shane, but for me, Josh Heupel, week 2 at home against Pitt. Again, that could be the difference between making a bowl or not. And I've said it time and time again, but this is a type of game where, fans that are on the fence, this is when you win them over. But if you drop this game, I won't say they totally write you off, but They're just going to think you're another Derek Dooley, Butch Jones, what have you. So I just think week 2 at Pitt, Johnny Majors game and everything, you got to win that one if you're Josh Heupel, I think.
That's a big game, Mike. I mean, it's a big game for the fan base, and yes, I'd love to have that. But you know me, I always got that Florida Gator game.
Oh my God! See, this is how these coaches get fired because they're going to be a 30-point underdog in that one.
No, I know that, but I don't need you to win that game. I just want you to be competitive in the game. Keep it kind of close. You know what I'm saying? Now, don't get me wrong. I'd love to go down there because I think we beat Bowling Green. Now I got my fanboy hat on. Okay, I ain't gonna lie. I've had a few beers here. And I do this every year. Okay, so I'm just preparing myself for another emergency podcast where I gotta get on here and explain why Tennessee sucks. But right now, I've convinced myself we're going to beat Bowling Green. I've convinced myself we're going to beat Pitt at Texas Tech, and we're going to be going to Florida Gators 3-0. Now, I'm not expecting to win the Florida Gator game, so I'll be perfectly honest there. But I expect them to kind of keep it close. You know what I'm saying? Just keep it within a couple touchdowns. Just make sure it's not a 40-2 game. That's what I'm asking for, Mike, because if you do, then I could see this program spiraling, and then all of a sudden we're losing to Missouri and we're losing to South Carolina and Ole Miss, and then it's woe is me, and we can't have that right in the middle of the season. So, yes, I just want to keep it competitive. That's all I'm saying. So, Tennessee, Florida, that's my game.
All right, Shane, winding down the list here. Texas A&M, kind of already hit on it, but make no mistake for Jimbo Fisher, it's got to be that Alabama game in the middle of the season. You're getting them at home. The stars are aligned. And not saying A&M's a lock to beat Alabama, certainly not. But Jimbo's going to be defined by how he does against Alabama, don't you think?
This is it. October 9th. Circle your calendars. Most important game for Texas A&M. I think if they're going to have a shot of the playoffs, they got to win this thing. You saw it. They lost it last year. They couldn't get in, so it's a pivotal game for them.
Now, last but not least, Shane, you are not going to like this one. Vanderbilt, Clark Lee. There's some early games that are tricky that I would go a long way to seeing how successful the Commodores are going to be this first year. But for me, you're the Vanderbilt coach. You get defined about how you do against Tennessee. And I know that's on the road at Tennessee. It's going to make it a little bit trickier. But November 27th, that's going to buy Coach Lee a ton of goodwill within that fan base if he beats Josh Heupel, don't you think?
Yeah, that's it, man. You hear that with any coach. We got to lock down our borders. So this is the same argument we've heard with Heupel. The same we're going to hear with Lee. It is important. It's a rivalry we don't like to acknowledge, but it's one that we cannot afford to lose. And they got nothing but to gain from winning. So I think it's a huge ball game for them.
Well, Shane, hey, that's all I got on this episode. And man, I'm itching for some college football right around the corner. We're going to have, all the coach comments and everything coming up here throughout the week. And we got, I've already got 3 guests lined up for this week. So it's going to be one hell of a week for the show leading up to the first SEC weekend. And I cannot wait for it.
Yeah, here we get the game week, and I'm making an argument that I hope we don't lose by too much against Florida, and that we defend ourselves against Vanderbilt. So we're in full swing here. So I'm just ready. We've got some real live action this week. It starts Thursday with my Tennessee Volunteers, but after that, man, you heard the schedule. It is on. Everybody's playing. Every team's going to have their own storyline, their own stories coming out. So, who's the new guys? You know what I'm saying? It's like one of these at the end of this week. You're going to be like, who the hell is that guy? Who's this guy? I love. That's what I love about SEC football. It's like you think you got a pulse of the program, and then about 2 weeks in, you're like, wait. I was way off. So that's what I love.
Well, that's the beauty of it, Shay. We sit here and share our picks and predictions for 6 months, and then we tear it all to shreds in a 1 or 2 Saturdays. So